Welcome, everyone. Sorry for being so loud. Welcome, everyone. Yes, welcome you, the viewer. This is The Real Story, and yes, I'm still Daniel Hamney. What do I have for you this evening? Something interesting, I hope, right? You know, something that makes you say, you know, I saw a show and it made me think. I'm starting to think a lot more often than I used to. I'm liking it. The brain being a muscle, exercised is a good thing. I'm actually learning to block out all the distraction that's out around me because I'm thinking clearly. All right, here we go. Who do you trust? Or should I say, trust who? That's what I'm thinking about this show. Trust who? Yeah. Well, let's go back in time. Okay. This is the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Do you know what that is? You get all these chiefs, not many Indians, just kidding. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Hugh Shelton, said something interesting. He said, the war, the Iraq war, was based on lies, to the point of like insubordination. But I know you wouldn't want to believe me, because wars based on lies, that can't be, not in my great constitutional republic. Here you go.
Let's go back to when you were chairman of the Joint Chiefs and even slightly afterwards when President Bush decided to go to war in Iraq. You talk about it was based on faulty intelligence and indeed on lies and deceit, but you also say something about insubordination. You say, for instance, during meetings, some people were kept on after Bush had tendered his opinion and issued an instruction based on that opinion. Yet certain strong-willed individuals seem to disregard him and forge ahead with their own agendas almost to the point of insubordination. That's very strong indictment.
Well, there was a very strong push in those days for us to go into Iraq, and there was absolutely no intelligence, zero, that pointed toward Al-Qaeda, that pointed toward the Iraqis. It was all Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and yet there was an element there that was pushing to go into Iraq at the same time.
But what do you mean about insubordination?
The fact that the president says himself, we're not going to do that right now. Let's focus on Afghanistan, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda. Yet below the surface, we still had this element that said, let's keep planning for Iraq just in case we can convince him that we can go.
And you think they could have convinced him?
Not at that time. I think that, as President Bush told me at Camp David, you know, I just don't see it. You know, we may go get Saddam and take him out, but it'll be at a time and a place of our choosing. It won't be as a part of the Afghanistan operation. He got it from day one when he was briefed by the CIA.
So you're saying he was pushed into it?
I think eventually that that same drumbeat continued, and Afghanistan, remember, was going very, very well. The drumbeat back here in Washington was still pushing, coming out of the Pentagon. Let's go to Iraq, let's take him out. And he finally said, let's go. We walked out on the limb before we could build a coalition of either the United Nations or NATO, one of the two.
You have some harsh words about then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Is he part of the group that you're targeting here?
Well, I personally like Secretary Rumsfeld, but he was part of the group, he and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz, that continued to push to go into Iraq.
So what does it mean when your chairman of the Joint Chiefs tells you that you were lied into war? Can you believe anything these people tell you? What makes you think they're leaders? Why would you trust them? They couldn't lead their way in high school or college. Now you're going to, what, think they're authorities, not servants? Have you seen how they mentally have adapted your thinking, or the public's thinking that they're authorities, that they're in charge, that they're leaders? Would you really think, I mean, do you think they lead you? That's a good one. So anyway, here we go. Lied into wars. So you listen to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying, lied into wars. Well, isn't that what happened with Vietnam? Wasn't there a Gulf of Tonkin incident where a supposed North Vietnamese torpedo boat shot torpedoes at two U.S. destroyers, excuse me? Got declassified 40 years later, huh? 50,000 Americans dead, like 150 to 200,000 Americans wounded, millions of dead Vietnamese, and you found out 40 plus years later that the ships weren't attacked with torpedoes, that it was a lie. It was a staged, provocateur, false flag, that's a CIA term, event. So you haven't been lied to war before, have you? So I ask you once again, you trust who? Lied to war. 50,000 dead Americans. Lied to war. Okay, well, let's go with World War II. Remember the Japanese? Didn't they attack China? Didn't they say that the Chinese attacked them first? Wow. Another lied to war thing, huh? Well, the history comes out years later. Oh my gosh, the Chinese didn't attack the Japanese. But the Japanese did go into Manchuria. You may want to read, well, you may not, but learn about the raping of Nanking. The Japanese were brutal. I'm sure they were just following orders, right? But that's not enough. 9/11. Could we have been lied to about that? 6 of the 10 9/11 commissioners say they were lied to. Planes don't vaporize, but I guess they do in Pennsylvania. I can take a 757 and put it through a 9-foot hole in the Pentagon. And the third building that collapsed in New York City, a 47-story skyscraper, which would be a major building in Boston, disappears, falls at free fall speed in 6 seconds. And they didn't investigate it. Yet we have one of the murder people, you know, they have a clock in Sharon so that we can understand someone, you know, a Sharonite was murdered. Yet there was no murder investigation, huh? They cleared out the crime scene, huh? Withheld evidence, waited 14 months to investigate it. So I'll say again, trust who? Lied into wars. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs says we were lied into wars. Isn't that what Germany did to Poland? Wasn't it a radio station in Gleiwitz that was attacked by Polish people, supposedly? And we found out at the Nuremberg trials that that was a lie. Lied into wars. It's not unprecedented, I guess. So anyway, Al-Qaeda dines at the Pentagon. My. Anwar al-Awlaki, the CIA slacky. Anyway, don't believe me. Here you go. So here's Anwar al-Awlaki, 2 months after 9/11, dines at the Pentagon. You and I, can we get a dining card? Maybe we need a Diners Club card, right? And if you get a Diners Club card, you can go eat with generals, with the top brass at the Pentagon. Well, evidently, the #1 Al-Qaeda person, we're told today, is Anwar al-Awlaki. He dines at the Pentagon 2 months after 9/11. Once again, don't believe me. I'm not making the stuff up. What's interesting is, isn't he the guy that the Fort Hood shooter, Major Hassan, was talking to with those email communiques for 2 years? Wasn't he the guy behind the underwear bomber? Boy, but they did order those naked body scanners more than a year before, and that was worth billions of dollars, and people were resisting them, but all of a sudden, liar, liar, pants on fire, there's an underwear bomber. And it turns out, check out the image. Why? Because you'll find out that the United States State Department put him on the plane without a passport. How can they do that? Because they were asked to do that by an intelligence agency, which they didn't name. But that's okay. You needed your Christmas terror, didn't you? Because terror is what you need. Yeah, kind of funny how all these lies go over time. I know you say, well, who would say that they lied about the to the 9/11 Commission? Well, maybe a person by the name of Farmer, who was the Attorney General of New Jersey. That's a legal thing. He's also the dean of the law school at Rutgers. Farmer says he was lied to. So you trust who? Did you want to keep a constitutional republic for your children? Or did you want tyranny? I'll ask you again. You trust who? It's time for men in the audience. It's time for men to stand up and be men again. So anyway, here we go. Here's a little picture for you. The NSA, Pentagon, right? National Security folks in Pentagon, they destroy books. Kind of like out of an Orwell movie, huh? Colonel Anthony Schaefer wrote the books. He ran what was known as Able Danger. You should find out that. Here's some homework. Able Danger. Type that into your search engine. Find out what Able Danger knew. And then when they said, gee, we knew there were going to be attacks because we had gotten the information, what did they do? They put a gag order on Sybil Edmonds. Type that in. Gag order, Sybil Edmonds. Because you're going to trust who? Rather interesting. So anyway, here's another picture. The Pentagon destroys the books. It gets better. Another picture. The Pentagon has burned 9,500 copies. They bought the entire first printing. Guess they don't want you to know the truth. But you trust who? Maybe, could it be that your corporations run your army more and your bankers run your army more than you do? Maybe, could they be running, could the CIA, if you look at any of the intelligence agencies, the Mossad, the KGB, okay, which is the GRU or whatever, okay, if you start looking at all of them, okay, MI6, MI5, could it be that they were set up by the bankers years ago, and these bankers are globalists, and they use these intelligence agencies to get the control and the laws they want passed in various countries? Could that be? Is this just history? Here's a little piece. Just because you thought during 9/11 that there were people from on the planes calling, remember, let's roll, yet when you looked at their wreckage site, there was no plane. They told you the ground swallowed a Boeing. That is just unbelievable, okay? But anyway, remember Flight 93 and all that, let's roll. Well, it turns out they lied to you. Not me. Listen.
For many years, we were arguing, and Keith Dudney led the way here, that these cell phone calls from the plane simply were not possible. There were about 15 calls from the 4 planes total that were said to be cell phone calls. And many of the calls that were most important for getting the story in the public mind about these hijackers on the plane were said to be cell phone calls. And 3 or 4 of the calls were said to be from Tom Burnett on Flight 93, who called his wife Dina Burnett 3 or 4 times and told her what was going on the plane. And she knew he was calling on her cell phone because she looked on the caller ID, and there's Tom's cell phone number. So there was no doubt about it. Other people just said, oh, they were calling me on a cell phone. But
presuming it might have been.
Yeah, so maybe they missed. But with Dina, how could you, she couldn't have made a mistake. So this was a big problem. So in 2004, the FBI changed its story just before it turned in its report to the 9/11 Commission and said, actually, there weren't any high altitude. That was Keith Dudney's point. Cell phone calls might be possible from an airliner, but only from a very low altitude, not from 30,000, 40,000 feet.
Right.
So they said there were only 2 cell phone calls, and those were when Flight 93 had gotten down to 5,000 feet.
The Ed Felt call was at 300 feet.
Well, they said 5,000. Maybe they've modified that in C.C. Lyles. So that was a rather remarkable change. They didn't tell the general public, because the public has gone on to this day believing there were cell phone calls from the plane. But if you read the 9/11 Commission report carefully, they never commit themselves to it, and in one of their background papers, they indicate there were only 2. Now, what do you do about Dina Burnett's calls? How could she have gotten calls that morning from Tom Burnett's cell phone if now the FBI says there were no cell phone calls from Tom Burnett, that he used a seatback phone? Now, the story gets worse yet. The most famous of all the calls from the plane were from Barbara Olson. She, of course, was a very well-known commentator on CNN. She was married to Ted Olson, who was the Solicitor General for the Department of Justice and had been very instrumental in getting Bush and Cheney elected in the disputed 2000 election.